Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane Q&A video today. Thanks for all your questions and comments, much appreciated. I've been on my travels over the last couple of weeks. I've done a couple of launches. I did the Kawasaki Versys 1100 launch, which was in northern Spain, just not far from Lleida, the base of the Pyrenees. Fantastic. You can read all about that bike on MCN's website and in the paper. I mean, what I would say is it's not the most exciting bike in the world. Everyone knows that, but it doesn't do anything wrong. It does everything it sets out to do perfectly. So it's a really, really good bike. I really enjoyed it. And as a sort of a all-rounder sports tourer that isn't too expensive, that's got quite a lot of oomph, quite a lot of toys, decent comfort. I think it's a really good bike. And then we went to Italy, somewhere between Rome and Ancona, kind of in the middle, to do the launch of the new Ducati Multistrada V4S. Now, by the time this video comes out, the test will still be under embargo, but you can read all about that on MCN's website, on video and in the paper. Other things to talk about is I've had a lot of questions and comments about this kind of state of British motorcycling, really, when it comes to dealers closing down. And unfortunately, a lot of dealers have been closing their doors lately, which is it's just been really, really sad. And some proper biking institutions have gone as well. So yeah, I mean, even some manufacturers are struggling. You know, there was some kind of not great news about KTM's finances not so long ago. The electric bike maker Energica have gone as well. So yeah, it's not looking good. I mean, why is that? Well, there's lots of reasons, isn't there? The bikes, a lot of bikes are very, very pricey now. The price has gone quite high insurance prices. The economic uncertainty of everything, you know, the peaks and troughs of COVID, you know, when lots of dealers couldn't get hold of used bikes and new bikes fast enough to satisfy their need during COVID. People were getting PCPs, and now that kind of bubble's burst a little bit. And yeah, I mean, the only manufacturer that's kind of doing well at the moment, really well, is Triumph with their 400s. So maybe kind of shows that there's a little bit more appetite for more affordable bikes as well. Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, you've got to feel sorry for all the people concerned and involved in all of these businesses, from the staff to the customers to all the businesses that surround it. You know, why has that happened? Well, there are much better business brains than mine who'd be able to tell you, but you know, the bottom line is very, very sad and not good times for the bike industry. I mean, why do you think this has all happened now? But yeah, let's hope things take a bit of an upturn soon. Well, let's get on to our first question today, which is from Barry 1379. Nevesy, when I started riding almost 20 years ago, it was almost assumed everyone should start on a 125 or 250, and you'd be crazy to start on a 600. These days, bikes like the RS660 are often recommended as a beginner bike. Is it just safer to start on bigger bikes now due to ABS and new tech, and generally bikes getting better, or is it more of an industry-driven push to sell more expensive bikes? Is it that a 250 used to be a 19,000 RPM revving screamer, an MC22 CBR 250RR, and now everything is slightly more docile? Thoughts? Well, thanks for your question. Yeah, I think maybe the reason you think that is because there's lots of A2 licensed versions of bigger bikes. So yeah, bikes like the RS660 and, you know, a lot of pretty hefty bikes can be restricted to A2, which you can ride on a restricted license. It's 47 bhp. I don't necessarily think the manufacturers are pushing that, but those deals certainly exist because the manufacturers make some great, like proper A2 licensed bikes, 300s and 400s and 500s and stuff like that. I don't think that getting an A2 restricted bike is necessarily a good idea, because I think what you need when you start riding is a light bike. And basically what you've got with a bigger bike is more weight, and if it's restricted, you've got all the disadvantages of having a big heavy bike with none of the power anymore. So it'd be interesting to see how many A2 restrictor kits manufacturers actually sell. But I don't think, and also traction control and rider modes or ABS, yeah, they make bikes safer, but I don't think they make them easier to ride for a beginner. So I don't think anything's changed at all really in terms of the kind of bike you need to really enjoy your riding experience and become a better rider. I don't think you'd ever benefit by jumping on a big bike too soon, because you'd be so, number one, you're saddled with all that weight, and weight is difficult to manage when you're learning. And also you've got a bike that is very, very capable in the hands of a more experienced rider and very fast in the hands of an experienced rider, but it's very difficult for a new rider to even kind of start to dip their toe into the bike's kind of abilities. And because you can't really feel what a bike's doing unless you can kind of just push it a little bit, you might stay too far away from its limits for too long. You'll never really enjoy it. So, you know, there's a reason why, you know, most people watching this video, you know, in the statistics, most people are my age or maybe a little bit older. And we've all grown up, most of us, riding 50s and then 125s and then kind of progressing through our biking journey. And, you know, there's that perception that the bigger the bike, the further you are in your journey. And that's not necessarily true. You know, big bikes aren't necessarily the best bikes, but 100% small bikes are the best bikes for learning on, because you can master a smaller bike quickly. And once you master a small bike, then it's easy to build the confidence to go onto the next bike, which is slightly bigger, slightly more powerful. You can master that a lot more quickly, and have a lot more fun along the way. You know, it's like swimming. You know, when you learn to swim, you want to stay in the shallow end because you want to keep your feet down and you want everything to feel safe. Yeah, you can dive in the deep end with armbands, but you'll never quite feel as good as you do in the shallow end. And it's the same with bikes. You know, you start with a 50, you end up absolutely ragging it to its limit. Same with a 125. So I think that biking journey should always be the same. Start small and work your way up. And you know, as you do get an A2 license, I think you should stay with an A2 size bike, a 47 bhp bike, and enjoy that and master that, and then move up and then move up. But it's an interesting question. What do you guys think? Do you think you should just jump on a bigger bike and be protected by all of its kind of modern technology, or do you think you should start small? Answers below. So thank you very much. Next one's from Matt13579. Hi Neasy, thanks for taking the time to make these videos. They're great. I've got a question about wheelie control and whether I can rely on it to help me learn. I've got a 23 XSR 900, which I absolutely love. I've been trying to build my wheelie confidence on it and was wondering if I should be able to tell the difference between the 3 levels, and if I should be using these to build my confidence, or if I'd be better off just switching off and trying to learn without it. I seem to be struggling with any level switched on. With all of them inhibit wheelies. I'm just a bit nervous of switching it off. From Matt. Well, we made a how to wheelie video with MCN yonks ago. It's had millions of views. And kind of the same theories apply really. I always think you should learn to wheelie on a push bike because the feeling of the balance point is just the same. And then if you're going to try and wheelie a motorbike, obviously you need to find a tame runway, somewhere you can just go off-road where you're not going to be told off. And it's a question of getting used to the feeling of the initial acceleration you need to be able to put a wheelie, because wheelies, in pictures look serene. When you see people pull wheelies on the TV, it just looks nice, but it's quite a violent action, a wheelie, because you're accelerating really hard. So in that video we explain that it's a good idea just to be in first gear and accelerate really hard, and then off, and then accelerate hard again and slow down, off and on, without trying to wheelie, just to get used to the force of the bike accelerating. And then after that, you can maybe just sit up on the bike a little bit more, so you're not pushing the front of the front end down, so the bike kind of starts to come up a little bit and a little bit more. But in answer to your question about wheelie control, I'd say most wheelie control systems, like on an XSR 900, will stop you from flipping, so it is very, very safe. The only time where you could possibly flip is if you were to really dump the clutch in first gear and the bike would wheelie before it's had a chance to cut the engine power. But if you wheelie off the throttle, I would say pretty much it's impossible to flip with wheelie control. You should be able to notice a difference between the three levels. So if you try not to wheelie with the clutch at first, the clutch is the best way to wheelie, because if you think of a clutch as your wheelie button, as soon as you slip the clutch, you can just pump the front wheel up quite easily at quite a low speed. If you do power wheelies, then the wheelies are too fast, basically. But they're a good way to learn, to sort of get used to the feeling. And if you put it in the most intrusive level and accelerate quite hard, you should feel the bike, the electronics catch the bike at quite a low height. And then as you get to a less intrusive wheelie levels, you'll feel the bike come up a little bit more and a little bit more. But there's no wheelie control, even on the KTM that I've got, that will let you balance wheelie. And also wheelie control on bikes doesn't really work well with trying to clutch the bike up, because when you're clutching the bike up to wheelie, you're sending it straight onto its balance point. But with wheelie control activated, the wheelie control will stop you getting up there and slam you down quite quickly. So wheelie control is more for, you know, controlling unwanted wheelies, I suppose you would say, which is, you know, if you accelerate hard out of a low speed corner on track and or on the road or something like that. But yeah, if you're learning and you're doing that first stage where you're accelerating hard to get used to the feeling of the acceleration, where you're letting the wheel rise a little bit, I'd keep the wheelie control on. Once you've got the confidence and you want to try a proper wheelie, then it's probably best to turn it off. Talking of my KTM, by the way, that's gone back as well. I've absolutely loved that bike, and there's a video up online with MCN now about my time with it. 15,300 miles in 5 months, and I loved every minute of it, and it never let me down. So check out that video, and thank you very much for your question. So next is from Barnet Speed Suzuki Thou. Thanks for these vids, very enlightening, no problem. So, semi-active suspension, worth it or not? I'm thinking in terms of feel and predictability, essentially. Without a camera reading ahead, a la Bentley's et al., is it always reactive? It's always reactive, not proactive, however fast the response. What are your thoughts? Well, thanks for your question. Yeah, there's no motorbike semi-active suspension that is proactive. Is that the right way around? So it will never predict bumps coming. It just reacts to the bumps that have already hit it. And I don't think it would be, I mean, how can a forward-facing camera really tell suspension how big or long a bump's going to be? So I think what we've got now is the best way. I think that semi-active suspension is really, really good to a point. I think for the road, I think it's a no-brainer, because semi-active suspension, where you can have different levels of suspension stiffness in different riding modes, gives you multiple bikes in one. You know, you can have it very soft. You can make your bike into a touring bike, into a bike that grips in the wet, into a bike that's very, very comfortable, that doesn't is not too stiff when you've got pillions. Or you can turn your bike into something that's got more control, better steering, kind of more support for faster riding. So I think electronic suspension is absolutely brilliant. But with electronic suspension, obviously the manufacturers need to keep the costs down. What you get with the electronics, maybe you take away with some of the suspension quality itself. So if you go on track, maybe with the exception of, say, the latest Panigale V4S or RSV4 factory or something like that, top level Öhlins electronic suspension is pretty good on track. But some of it isn't, some of the kind of lesser brands aren't, and you, especially with the front, don't get that nice front end feel when you're right at the limit, when you're hard on the brakes at the bottom of the stroke and you're turning into the corner, you're letting go of the brakes and you want to feel what the tyre's doing. I'd say mechanically adjustable suspension, and especially good quality aftermarket suspension, is a lot better. But definitely for the road, semi-active and electronic suspension is definitely worth it. So there you go. Thanks very much for your question. One thing to add, I've talked about it before, an HP4 BMW in 2014 with electronic suspension, and probably one of the best race bikes I've ever had. And the suspension was brilliant, but we had to change the suspension hardware and software for it to work properly. So number one, you had to tell the computer to make the suspension act in a racy way rather than a road focused way. So the suspension behaves a lot differently around a racetrack than it does on a road. So that was one thing you had to change. And then we had to change the actual internals. So we had to change spring rates and damping rates and all those things that you would need to do if you have mechanically adjustable suspension. So and then you could only set it up on a computer. So with the engine switched off on the BMW, the suspension goes rock hard. So you can't bounce it up and down with the electronic suspension. And when the bike is running but stationary, the damping is completely off. So the bike's really bouncy. So it's impossible to set the suspension up at a standstill. You've got to do it by feel on the track or with the data. So it was actually quite complicated racing with electronic suspension. Which is why a year later, when we got our next BMW, we went to K-Tech, and it was absolutely amazing. But semi-active for the road, 100%. Next, it's from Ulevies Orden. Hey, another question regarding the 2017 Fireblade. How do you think it keeps up or compares to the newer generation of blades, namely the SC82? I'm in the process of buying a 17 blade and absolutely loved it. Well, thanks for your question. I mean, I love the fact that you know that the new blade is called an SC82. We talked about this before with code names for bikes, with R1s and RGVs and stuff like that, and Kawasaki's. I've got absolutely no clue what these code names are, because when we talk about them, when we're testing them, when we go to launches, the manufacturers just talk about that year's model. It will be a 2020 blade or whatever. So yeah, I always find those code names quite interesting. The 17 blade, I think, is amazing. It had a bad rap at the beginning. I mean, we've said this before, but very, very quickly, the story of the 17 blade really was, it came out at the launch of Portimao. Everyone loved it. It was a lot more powerful than the old one. It had electronics for the first time. It was a lot lighter, more nimble. It was really, really good. Then we tested it at MCM. We did a group test. We put it on a track with all its rivals around Rockingham, and we put slicks on it. And later on, we realised that electronics were a little bit of an Achilles heel, but because we had slicks on the bike, we never bumped into its traction control. So that bike was really nimble, really light, and against all the other thousands was third fastest around the track. I think the Beamer and the Ducati might have been quicker, but only a fraction off. And then we took all those bikes on a road trip to Wales, and the blade was really nice and friendly. It had the quality, that kind of oozed HRC specialness. It felt like an RC30. It felt more special than the BMW. It felt easier to ride than the Ducati. It felt more modern than the GSX-R of the day, and the R1. So it won our group test. So far so good. Then a few other magazines tested it with standard tyres and they bumped into the electronics. So the traction control on a blade, on the first generation blade, was more of a safety device. So if it had a slide, it would recognise the slide, cut the power, and then give you the power back afterwards. And that's on the road where you would ease off. On the track, if you have a slide, you generally, if you're trying to go fast, keep the throttle on. And what would happen is it would slide, the ignition would cut, or the throttle bodies would close to bring the slide back, but then suddenly it would give you full power again. It wouldn't just stay, you couldn't keep the throttle fully on. So that caused the bike to be quite unpredictable if you rode it like that. If you left the throttle against the stop in a corner and it slid, you'd be in trouble. You'd have to kind of feather it like a normal bike. And also the same goes with the wheelie control. If you hold the bike against the wheelie electronics with full throttle, it would come up to a point and then suddenly the electronics would let go and it would almost try and flip. And of course, and also some people had gearbox problems with them, or shift, or finding gears. That was that problem. And then of course there was the much publicised problems with gearbox problems with the TT bikes that caused a lot of problems. So rewinding, the TT bikes had racing gearboxes in, so they were nothing like the road bikes, so they couldn't really compare. It's a bit of a coincidence. We ran 2017 Fireblades at the Ron Haslam Race School for 3 years with no problems at all. No crashes as a result of gearboxes or electronics or anything like that. So I think that bike got quite a bad rap. It's interesting, that engine is going to go in the new CB1000 when it comes out, which we're riding in December. So to cut a long story short, I think the 2017 Fireblade is a really good bike if that's what you fancy. It's probably more usable as a road bike than the SC82. You know, the current generation blades, very peaky, very, very cramped, very, very single-minded, but very fast as a super stock bike or a track day bike. So yeah, go for it. Go for a 17 blade. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Next is from R. Jansen 3810. Thanks for your question. I can appreciate your love of the GSX-R as I did the same with my YZF 750 back in the day. Can you elaborate on your overtired comments, please? I don't use tyre warmers either, so I choose Super Corsa SP for that reason. Never had a cold rubber on the road with them either. Just curious, confused about your too much grip view. Ding. Thanks. Well, thanks very much for your question. Yeah, I talked about my GSX-R 750 in my last update. I had Pirelli Super Corsa SPs on it, which are road going track day tyres, and I said they were probably had too much grip, really. They were too much, overtired. And what I meant by that is, you know, the tyres are amazing. They had loads and loads of grip. I never had any problem, but I don't think I could use those tyres superpowers. The tyres have got so much grip now. Even normal run-of-the-mill sports tyres have got so much grip. So unless you're kind of using all the grip of your tyres as superpowers, they're a little bit of a waste because they'll still wear out as much as if you'd been really hard with them and really used them to their limit. And yeah, you're paying a lot more money for more sticky tyres as well. So I don't think I was using them to their full potential. So I'm thinking of going back a rung. So the next rung down in Pirelli's range is the Diablo Rosso Corsa 4, which I think will be better for my GSX-R. So I still think it'll have more grip than power, but all of a sudden you've got better wear, you've got better wet weather performance, you've got kind of just an easier tyre to manage when it's cold. Even though you say you've never had a problem with cold rubber on the road, I would suggest that below 10 degrees on a Super Corsa or a Race Tech, they haven't got a lot of grip on the road in the winter. But maybe you're not riding your bike in the winter anyway. So yeah, so you see it a lot. People put the stickiest tyres they possibly can on the bike. And and you can see why, because it's like a bit of a crutch. You know, why wouldn't you want something that's ultra sticky? But you've kind of, they're way too sticky for what you need, and you kind of never know because you never get close to its limit. You know, you've got a massive safety buffer. If that's what you want, that's fine, but you're not using their superpowers, so you're kind of suffering the durability and the cost of those tyres for no reason really. And also, you know, really sticky tyres on a kind of a less powerful bike, it's kind of like riding through treacle a little bit. You know, they don't kind of, when you go on a dyno, the dyno operators never, or if they sometimes have a regular dyno tyre for racing tyres. They'll have an old tyre, an old sports touring tyre on a wheel that they'll use for their dynoing all the time. Whereas you put a sticky tyre in the dyno and it sticks to the rollers and it kind of slows it down. And it's a similar way with the tyres on tarmac. It kind of, they're so sticky, they grip, it's like riding through treacle. And if you haven't got that much power, it probably slow you down. So yeah, something kind of less grippy is better, I think. And it kind of gives you more feel, because once you can get close to the limit of a tyre, then the bike feels a lot more comfortable. You know what it's going to do. If you can't feel what it's doing, it might kind of buckaroo you at any point. So it's better to have a lot of feel. So that's what I mean by that. And finally, from Ash Divakaran, thanks for your question. Love listening to superbike stories from the noughties. Have superbikes become more aggressive, or have people become softer? Yeah, good question. I mean, people don't really buy superbikes anymore, do they? But in answer to your question, superbikes have become more aggressive. At the same time that they've become more cramped, at the same time they've become more expensive and more kind of irrelevant for the road. So, you know, that's why they're not selling anymore. You know, back in the noughties, in the era of the, you know, when the R1s and the ZX10s and the Blades and the GSX-R1000s ruled the roost, they were pretty manageable. You know, people would use them as touring bikes. They had relative comfort, they had relative amount of grunt. We were all younger, we were all more supple, and I think that's why super bikes and super sport bikes used to sell in their droves. But, you know, nowadays, to take an R1 on holiday or abroad, or a Panigale, not only would it be an absolute waste of their talents, they just wouldn't be as enjoyable to ride as some of the older stuff. They haven't got the grunt. I mean, they've got more technology. They're a lot safer, obviously, but they're smaller, they're peakier, and yeah, much more single-minded. So I don't think people have become softer. I just think we've got a little bit older, a little bit creakier, and there's so much more choice out there now. I mean, back in the noughties, if you wanted a bike with all the technology, only a super bike had it. But now if you want a bike with all the technology, an adventure bike's got it, or a tall rounder's got it, or a retro's got it. So they've got, or even a cruiser like a Diavel V4, absolutely packed with superbike electronics and performance. So we've got a lot more choice now, and you know, the biking world's a lot better place for it. But yeah, brilliant. That's that for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Next week we've got another what makes this bike great, with an icon of a machine. So stay tuned for that one, and I will see you very soon.